At first, everyone thought it was just a dog misbehaving during a school visit. But when Bruno, the retired K9, ripped open the ceiling tile of a decades-old classroom, what fell to the ground stunned the entire town. What was hidden above those children's heads for over half a century? And why did this dog seem to know it was there? Beat, pause for suspense. Welcome to Heroic Animals, the channel where unbelievable stories of loyalty, bravery, and instinct come to life. If you believe animals can sense what we cannot, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because today's story will take you deeper than you ever expected. Lincoln Elementary had always seemed ordinary, old. Yes, but unremarkably so. Its brick walls had stood through storms, generations of students, and decades of history classes that barely scratched the surface of the past. But beneath the innocent hum of daily routines, something had been waiting. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Officer Ava arrived at the school for a routine safety presentation. With her trotted Bruno, a retired K9 with a streak of medals and a nose that had once uncovered 2 kidnapped children and a buried weapons cache. Though now older and slower, his instincts were sharper than ever. The third graders welcomed them with excitement. Ava began the session with a cheerful tone, explaining what police dogs do and how Bruno used to work alongside officers in the field. Bruno, wearing his honorary vest, sat obediently by her side. For the first 15 minutes, he behaved exactly as expected, calm, composed, and gentle with the kids. He even let a little girl named Sophie scratch behind his ears. But then, he changed. Without warning, Bruno's head snapped toward the back of the room. His ears went up, his body stiffened. He growled low, rising slowly to his feet. Ava noticed it immediately. "Bruno?" she called gently, thinking maybe a student had dropped something that startled him. But Bruno wasn't scared. He was alert, focused. The classroom grew quiet as he walked to the far corner and stared at the ceiling. Then, without hesitation, he leapt onto a desk and began pawing at one of the ceiling tiles. The teacher, Ms. Crandall, gasped, "Oh no, honey, that's not. He must hear a squirrel or something. That section is close to the attic." But Ava's face had gone pale. Bruno wasn't responding to a noise. He was digging, pawing at the ceiling like he knew something was hidden behind it. Like it was his job. The kids watched wide-eyed as Bruno barked sharply, his claws raking over the cheap acoustic tile. And then, with a sudden crack, the tile snapped loose and crashed onto the floor, releasing a cloud of dust and insulation. Several students shrieked and ducked. Ava stepped forward instantly, commanding, "Everyone stay back." Bruno, now quiet, simply stared down through the open hole. Ava looked up, then back down. Something had fallen. She moved quickly and picked it up. A small wooden box, no larger than a lunch pail. Old, weathered, and sealed with a rusted clasp. On the lid were 2 barely visible letters, PT, and a year, 1964. The room went still. Bruno sat beside her, tail still, eyes fixed on the box. Ava's heart pounded. This wasn't attic junk. This had been hidden, deliberately. And somehow, this dog knew exactly where to find it. The teacher stepped closer. "PT?" she whispered. "That could be. Wait. No, that can't be right." "What?" Ava asked. "There was a janitor here. Peter Thomason. Worked here in the 60s. Left suddenly. No one ever said why. Just disappeared." Ava stared down at the box in her hands. Bruno nudged her elbow gently. Whatever was inside had waited a long time to be found. And this was only the beginning. The wooden box was heavier than it looked. Dust clung to its edges, and the old clasp was fused shut by decades of rust. Officer Ava held it tightly as she left the classroom, with Bruno walking protectively by her side. Principal Delgado met them outside. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking at the shaken teacher and the wide-eyed students peering through the glass. Ava didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the initials again, PT, and the year. "Do you have any records on a Peter Thomason?" she asked. Delgado frowned. "That name rings a bell. Janitor here, I think, years ago. Retired? Or, wait, no, he left suddenly. There were rumors." Ava glanced at Bruno. He sat still, tail curled around his legs, his eyes never leaving the box. "Mind if I borrow your staff room?" Ava asked. "I need some space to open this." And a pair of pliers if you've got one. Moments later, she and Bruno were seated at a small round table in the staff break room. Delgado handed her an old toolbox and left them alone. The clasp resisted at first, but with a few grunts and the twist of a screwdriver, it gave way with a metallic snap. The lid creaked open. Inside lay two items: a faded leather-bound notebook, and a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be a child's handkerchief. Ava's fingers trembled as she picked up the cloth bundle. It was tied with a delicate pink ribbon, aged and stained by time. She slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a silver locket, its chain tangled and tarnished. She opened it carefully. Two tiny black and white photos. One of a girl, no older than 6, smiling with a chipped front tooth. The other, a woman, possibly her mother. Neither photo had names. Ava reached for the notebook. The leather cover was cracked, and the first few pages were too smudged to read. But as she flipped toward the center, the handwriting became clearer. Her breath caught. It wasn't a journal. It was a confession. March 12, 1964. I didn't mean for her to get hurt. I just needed someone to talk to. The school said I wasn't allowed to talk to the kids outside of janitorial work. But she wasn't afraid of me. She sat with me during lunch sometimes. Said I reminded her of her granddad. Then one day she followed me into the storage hallway. The one with the crawl space. She tripped, hit her head. She didn't wake up. I panicked. I thought they'd think I did something. I didn't. I swear I didn't. I left her there, behind the vent. I thought I'd go back and tell someone. But I never did. Ava stopped reading. The room suddenly felt smaller. Colder. Bruno whined softly. She turned to him. Is that what you smelled? Boy? Something behind the ceiling? Something worse? Bruno barked once. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. Ava stood up and grabbed the notebook. We need to get back to that classroom, she said, her voice tight. Because if the confession was true, if there really was a space behind the crawl panel, then there might still be something there. Something left behind since 1964. Something that only Bruno had sensed. The classroom was empty when Ava returned. Students had been relocated to the cafeteria, just in case. The children's artwork still fluttered gently on the walls as the HVAC hummed quietly above. Bruno walked ahead of her, tail lowered, movements cautious. He knew exactly where to go. Ava brought a flashlight and a multi-tool from her cruiser. Standing on the teacher's desk, she examined the exposed square in the ceiling where Bruno had torn down the tile. Behind the hole was a crawl space no larger than a kitchen cabinet. Sealed off decades ago during a school renovation. She could see the wooden beams and insulation layers from the 1960s. Still untouched. She pulled back the edge of the insulation and shined her light into the dark. Her breath caught. Tucked deep inside, nestled in the back corner, was a small shoe. Tiny, pink, covered in dust and cobwebs. Ava froze, then reached in, heart pounding, and retrieved the shoe carefully with gloved hands. Her light followed. There was more. A fragment of a child's dress. A rusted bracelet. And farther back, wedged beneath a beam, something wrapped in burlap. She backed down slowly, cradling the evidence like it might shatter. Bruno let out a quiet growl, not of aggression, but warning, protective. Ava looked at him. Good boy. You were right. She didn't open the burlap there. She knew better. Protocol mattered now. This was no longer a curiosity, it was a potential crime scene. She radioed for backup. Within 20 minutes, detectives and a forensic team arrived. The classroom was sealed, the crawl space marked off with caution tape. The small bundle in burlap was gently removed and taken to the coroner's office. They would confirm what Ava already feared. There was a body in that crawl space. A child's. And it had been there for over 60 years. News spread fast. By the next morning, Lincoln Elementary was on every local news channel. Parents demanded answers. Former teachers were contacted. Reporters showed up at the gates. And in the middle of it all stood Ava and Bruno. Quiet, focused, waiting for what came next. The forensic report came in that evening. The remains belonged to a girl between 6 and 8 years old. Her bones showed no signs of prolonged trauma, but there was a fracture on her skull. Likely the result of a fall. It matched the description in the notebook. The girl had never been reported missing. Because no one ever knew she was gone. Ava sat in the break room again, staring at the locket and the photos inside. She showed them to the local police database. Nothing came up. No missing children in the area matching her face. No names linked to Peter Thomason. He had vanished after that school year. Never employed anywhere again. One of the detectives, an older man named Joe, leaned over her shoulder. Back then, he said quietly, not every disappearance was reported, especially if the family was struggling. Ava looked over at Bruno, who was now curled beneath her chair, ears twitching in his sleep. I wonder if that's why he found her, she whispered, because no one else ever did. Joe nodded slowly. He gave her a voice. And the town would never forget that. Next. Part 4: The Forgotten Girl's Name. Let me know when you're ready. The story is about to shift toward uncovering the girl's identity and the hidden truths about the man who left her behind. Ban Da Noi. Part 4. Chat GPT Da Noi. Certainly. Here's part 4 of the story, where we dive deeper into uncovering the identity of the forgotten girl and the chilling truth about the man who vanished. Part 4. The Forgotten Girl's Name. Approximately 700 words. The notebook offered no name. Just, she, the girl, or, little one. And that haunted Ava more than anything. This child, someone's daughter, someone's classmate, had been left in the dark. Both literally and in memory. No one had missed her loudly enough for the world to remember. But Ava wasn't ready to let her disappear again. Bruno sat quietly near her feet as she pored through old school records in the police archive room. Principal Delgado had granted her full access to the student logs from the early 1960s. Most of them were handwritten, preserved in dusty leather binders. Pages yellowed, names fading. She focused on the year, 1963-1964. There it was, a class list for Room 2B. 21 names. Ava wrote them all down, then cross-referenced them with DMV and census databases. One by one, she tracked them. Some had moved, some were deceased, and a few were still living in town. All but one had follow-up documentation. The last name, Claire Hensley. There were no high school transcripts, no DMV records, no marriage licenses, no medical history, just a single-line entry in a school roster. And then, nothing. Ava's pulse quickened. She searched the local newspapers from that year. No missing child alerts, no obituaries for a Claire Hensley. She picked up the photo from the locket again. The smile, the hair tied with little bows. A child in the 3rd grade. Could it be her? She needed confirmation. By late afternoon, Ava stood on the doorstep of a quiet home on the edge of town. A weathered nameplate read, Eleanor Marsh, maiden name, Hensley. Claire's older sister. Eleanor answered the door with a cane in hand and a look of cautious curiosity. "You're a police officer?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ava replied softly. "I'm here about your family. Specifically, about Claire." Eleanor froze. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. Her eyes filled instantly with something between fear and recognition. "Claire," she whispered. "No one said her name in decades." Ava nodded gently. "May I come in?" Inside, Eleanor sat in a recliner with a faded blanket across her knees. Bruno lay beside Ava's feet, as still as stone. "I was 11 when Claire died," Eleanor said, voice barely above a whisper. "Mama told everyone she ran away. Said Claire was a handful. But I never believed it." "Why?" Ava asked. "Because she left her doll," Eleanor replied, eyes glistening. "She never went anywhere without that doll. And Mama refused to let me ask questions. She said, that's the last we speak of her. And we never did." Ava pulled out the locket. Eleanor gasped. "That's hers. That's Claire's." She reached out with trembling hands, holding it like a fragile piece of time. "She wore this every day," Eleanor said. "That's Mama in the other picture. Back when things were better." Ava hesitated before saying it out loud. "We believe Claire died in the school. In 1964. Eleanor covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "I knew it," she said. "I knew something happened." Ava gently placed her hand on the woman's shoulder. "She didn't run away," she whispered. "She was left behind. Forgotten. But not anymore." And it was true. Because Bruno, an old, gray-muzzled K9 no longer on active duty, had refused to let her remain hidden. He barked when no one else listened, scratched until the past tore open. He gave Claire back her name. And with it, a chance to be mourned properly. The next morning, Lincoln Elementary lowered its flag to half-mast. For Claire Hensley, a girl no one remembered, until a retired K-9 refused to let her be forgotten. News of the discovery had spread beyond the town's borders. Reporters crowded outside the school gates. Cameramen parked near the playground. But inside the town, something deeper was happening, something heavier than headlines. Conversations that had been buried for 60 years were beginning to stir. Elderly residents stopped by the police station, one by one, offering memories, some foggy, some eerily clear. They remembered Claire's mother, Delilah Hensley, a sharp-tongued woman with a temper, who often came to the school angry. They remembered Claire, quiet, always clinging to her locket and her doll, the one with one missing button eye. And they remembered the janitor, Peter Thomason. He was strange, said one man, now in his 70s, not bad, just off. Used to sit outside during lunch and talk to himself. Claire was the only kid who talked back. A retired librarian brought in an old yearbook. There was Claire, smiling on the second row. Ava stared at the photograph. The same smile from the locket. She had a name, a face, and now, she had history. That afternoon, Ava stood beside a makeshift memorial that had appeared beneath the old oak tree behind the school. Students had left flowers, drawings, and a single stuffed doll, sewn with a mismatched eye. Bruno sat next to her, his head low, his gaze steady. Principal Delgado approached with slow steps. "We'll be placing a plaque," he said, "in the hallway. Something permanent." Ava nodded. "She deserves it." Delgado hesitated. "There's something else. I found an old storage key labeled, Janitor's Wing. It opens a section of the basement we sealed off years ago. I thought it was just an old boiler room. But maybe." Ava's stomach sank. If Peter had been hiding one secret, there might be more. The basement of Lincoln Elementary was cold, lit only by flickering overheads. Dust hung thick in the air. Delgado handed Ava the key, and she unlocked the rusted metal door at the far end of the corridor. It creaked open slowly. Inside was a narrow room filled with abandoned furniture, broken lockers, and shelves of forgotten textbooks. But near the back wall was a metal filing cabinet, dented and chained shut. Ava tugged the bolt cutters from her belt and snapped the lock. Inside were stacks of manila folders, handwritten notes, loose photographs, detention slips, letters. Ava pulled out one paper, her eyes widening. It was a disciplinary report, addressed to the school board, from 1963. Concerns regarding Mr. Peter Thomason's interaction with students. Her hands trembled as she kept reading. Another note, dated just weeks before Claire's disappearance. Teacher reports discomfort with Thomason. Claims he was seen talking alone with a female student repeatedly. Recommends review. None of these had ever made it into the official records. They had been buried here. Hidden. Just like Claire. Ava felt rage boil beneath her skin. Not just at Peter Thomason, but at the adults who had looked away. The system that had failed a child who only wanted someone to talk to. A little girl who was seen, dismissed, and then lost. Until now. Bruno let out a soft whine beside her. She looked down, gently placing a hand on his head. "You brought her back," she whispered. "You did what no one else could. And for that, a town had been given the chance to remember. To mourn. To make it right." The question echoed louder with every passing day. What happened to Peter Thomason? The man who left behind a notebook full of guilt. The janitor whose quiet presence had once filled the halls of Lincoln Elementary, then disappeared as suddenly as the girl whose life he took. Officer Ava knew that if justice was ever going to mean something in this case, it would have to reach him, even if he was no longer alive. But first, she had to find him. The archived personnel file showed that Thomason had resigned from the school in May of 1964, 2 weeks after Claire's disappearance. There were no police records, no criminal reports, and no missing persons cases filed in his name. Just silence. He had erased himself from the map. Ava started with his last known address, an apartment above a hardware store on the edge of town. The building was now a cafe. The owner, a kind middle-aged woman named Maria, led Ava up to the second floor, where a small window still looked out over the street. This place was empty for years. Maria said, "We had to renovate everything. We found old junk up here, but nothing useful." "You think this Thomason guy lived here?" Ava nodded. She looked around. There was nothing left of the man. No furniture, no documents, no photographs. But Bruno, trailing behind her on his leash, moved with intent. He sniffed one corner, then another. Then he stopped. In the far back of the room, behind a peeling wall panel, he started to growl. Ava stepped over and pried the panel loose. Tucked inside was a tin coffee can, rusted and sealed with masking tape. Inside were newspaper clippings, dozens of them. Headlines from other towns. Missing girl, age 7, last seen near bus stop. Child disappears from park, foul play suspected. Small town mourns unsolved case. Ava's blood ran cold. Some were from the late 60s. Others from the 70s. Different states. No obvious connection. Except one. They all happened in towns where Peter Thomason had once lived, after leaving Lincoln Elementary. Her hands shook as she unfolded the last article. The date, 1979. The town, Hopewell, Arizona. The headline, Janitor resigns days after disappearance. Police continue search for 8-year-old Lucy Bell. And in the blurry photo beneath the article was a grainy image of the school's maintenance crew. Second from the right, an older, balding man, Peter Thomason, still working in schools, still around children, still vanishing when something went wrong. Ava stared at the image for a long time. This wasn't a one-time accident. Claire hadn't been the only one. Back at the precinct, Ava laid out the timeline. She connected the towns, the schools, the missing girls. Every single incident occurred shortly after Thomason moved into town. Every single time, he slipped away quietly before investigators could pin anything down. He's not just a man who made a mistake, Ava said aloud to her team. He's a predator, and no one ever saw it. Bruno rested by her chair. Sensing her tension, Ava looked down at him. You knew. You felt something back in that school. That's why you wouldn't stop. She looked back at the board. The trail ended in Arizona in 1980. No records after that. No new employment. No death certificate. No trace. Until Detective Joe entered the room. We might have something, he said, holding up a file. A grave, unmarked, in rural New Mexico, buried under the name Alan Peters. Alias? Ava asked. Maybe. The local sheriff says an old man died alone out there in 1997. Quiet, reclusive, no known relatives. But get this, when they cleared out his trailer, they found school ID tags. Ava's breath caught. What name? Lincoln Elementary. Issued 1963. Bruno let out a low bark. Even in death, Peter Thomason had tried to hide. But the past has teeth. And this time, it had a name. The small graveyard in rural New Mexico was nearly forgotten. Just a patch of dry earth bordered by rusted fencing and scattered sagebrush. No flowers, no visitors, only one grave caught Ava's eye. A concrete marker. No date of birth, no epitaph, just a name. Alan Peters. But thanks to DNA pulled from Peter Thomason's old belongings, compared to the few known records from Lincoln Elementary, there was no more doubt. Alan Peters and Peter Thomason were the same man. The predator had buried himself under a new name, hundreds of miles from where his darkness began. Ava stood beside the unmarked grave, Bruno sitting quietly at her heel, watching the wind whip dust across the desert. This is where it ends, she whispered, not just for him, for them, because back in Lincoln, and in every town he passed through, someone had been left behind. In the weeks that followed, the evidence in Ava's possession grew. The newspaper clippings, the school IDs, the handwritten confession, the bones behind the ceiling, and the photographs of missing children from towns that never got closure. When Ava presented the full case file to the state attorney's office, their reaction was swift. A task force was formed to re-examine cold cases from the towns Peter Thomason had lived in over 3 decades. In Hopewell, Arizona, a new investigation was opened into Lucy Bell's disappearance. In Missouri, they exhumed another unidentified child's remains from a field near a former school. Everywhere his name touched, pain resurfaced, but also the possibility of peace. And it all started with Bruno. The town of Lincoln gathered in the school gymnasium on a gray Saturday morning. Not for a drill, not for a PTA meeting. For Claire Hensley, the little girl who had been hidden in the ceiling for 60 years. Whose photo now stood framed on the stage beneath a banner that read, "We remember." Ava stepped up to the microphone. Bruno standing proudly at her side, wearing a ceremonial collar. Claire never got the chance to grow up, she said, her voice steady. She didn't get a memorial, or a search party, or justice, until now. She paused, letting the silence settle, and it wasn't because of any one officer, or report, or fingerprint. It was because of a dog. A retired K9 who still knew how to do the one thing he was trained for, find what was lost. Applause echoed through the gym. Children looked at Bruno with admiration. Parents wiped away tears. Elderly citizens nodded solemnly. Bruno didn't wag his tail. He just sat, noble and quiet, as if he knew the weight of it all. Later, a bronze plaque was installed just outside room 2B. It read, "In memory of Claire Hensley, 1956 to 1964. Discovered with courage, remembered with love, because one voice, one bark, was louder than silence." Underneath, a second line, "With gratitude to K9 Bruno." But the story wasn't over yet. Because as the ceremony ended and the crowd slowly filtered out, Ava felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Detective Joe, holding a manila folder. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "Another school. In Kansas. Same pattern. Missing girl. 1972. Guess who was working there for 6 months?" Ava stared at the folder. Even in death, Peter Thomason's trail wasn't finished. But now, she wasn't chasing him alone. She had Bruno. And the ghosts of the forgotten? They were no longer silent. 6 months had passed since the discovery at Lincoln Elementary. The dust had settled, but the echoes of what Bruno uncovered still rippled through the town and far beyond. Over a dozen cold cases across multiple states were reopened. Families who had lived in limbo for decades finally had names, faces, graves to visit. Justice had never moved this quietly, or barked so loudly. Bruno, now officially retired, spent his days in peace. No more calls, no more crime scenes. Ava had adopted him after the investigation, and he now lived on her property just outside town, chasing birds, sunbathing on the porch, and occasionally barking at the mailman with the same righteous conviction that once cracked a 60-year-old mystery. But something was different about Bruno now. He walked slower, rested more. His muzzle had turned completely gray, and his once alert ears folded gently now when he slept. Ava noticed the change. So when the call came from the town council asking if Bruno could attend a final ceremony at City Hall, Ava paused, then nodded. "He'll be there," she said. "He deserves this." That Friday evening, under golden lamplight and a sky streaked with crimson clouds, a crowd gathered in front of Lincoln's City Hall. A podium stood center stage. Reporters were present, but not in droves, just enough to capture what would become a defining moment in Lincoln's history. Ava led Bruno onto the stage to a standing ovation. Children clapped, parents cried, veterans saluted. The mayor stepped forward and cleared his throat. "We often honor bravery in uniforms, in badges, in sacrifice," he began, "but tonight, we honor a different kind of hero. One with 4 legs, a worn snout, and the kind of loyalty this town will never forget." He held up a velvet box. "And so, by resolution of the town of Lincoln and in recognition of extraordinary service to justice and community, Bruno is hereby awarded the Medal of Civic Honor." Cheers erupted as the medal was fastened gently to Bruno's collar. He didn't wag his tail, just stood, noble and still, eyes half closed as if absorbing the moment. Ava knelt beside him and whispered, "You found her. You gave her back to the world." Bruno leaned into her shoulder and sighed, deep, content, tired. A week later, Bruno passed away in his sleep. Peaceful, warm, home. Ava buried him beneath the old oak tree behind Lincoln Elementary, not far from where Claire's memorial stood. Children came with drawings. A local sculptor carved a stone marker. Simple and beautiful. Bruno, K9 officer, hero, friend. He listened when no one else did. But Bruno's story didn't end in the ground. Across the country, police departments re-examined the role of retired K9s in cold case investigations. New funding was introduced for scent training programs focused on historical forensics. School boards across 3 states launched audits of their records from the 1960s to 1980s. And in Lincoln, a new initiative was born. The Bruno Project, a program dedicated to teaching children about safety, awareness, and the silent courage it sometimes takes to speak up. Every third grader in Lincoln now hears Bruno's story. And every time they pass his statue, cast in bronze, standing tall near the school entrance, they stop, place a hand on his paw, and remember what he taught the world. That truth has a scent. And real heroes never stop searching. Bruno may no longer be with us, but what he uncovered, what he gave back to a forgotten little girl, will echo for generations. In silence, he spoke. In instinct, he remembered. And in the end, he reminded us all that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard. Folded hands, thank you for watching this emotional journey on heroic animals. If Bruno's story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we invite you to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of bravery, loyalty, and hope. Speech balloon. And now, we'd love to hear from you. What did this story mean to you? How do you think animals like Bruno continue to teach us lessons we often forget? Leave your thoughts and tributes to Bruno in the comments below. We read every word. Paw. Until the next story, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a loyal heart.